This is a virtual reading of Conspirators, To Each His Own Agenda by Mag Gupta.
Chapter 27. Ferrus. Julius's campaign against Gladium had led him to recruit Gilorn and Iolem to be his scouts of Sicilia. Iolem was keen to visit the Greek lands, having not been able to come to the wedding in Seaward. When Gilorn had told Alfil his new orders, she had demanded that she go with him. She didn't like Islesfield, and she wanted to see the coast. She had never seen a body of water bigger than the river that Islesfield sat in the middle of. Also, she had heard of the legend of Julius and the swan, just as every woman in the kingdom had. She was eager to be close to the legend, something that caused Gilorn's stomach to turn. The river in Islesfield had amazed her, and she had developed a taste for bigger sights. The three of them rode to Ferrus with Turgon's permission, and he had given Alfil a horse to ride on, and a fourth for supplies. They were denied access to Adrianople, even with the crest of Islesfield on Gilorn's chest, so they had to journey through the lands of the Highland Scottish tribes of Securi, who lived in the mountain passes of the Apennines between the kingdom and Horseland. They welcomed them with a sinister indifference, and warned them not to ascend any of the mountain path, and a rider shadowed them as they travelled. It added a week to their travel, but finally they arrived at the castle. Alfil was amazed by the sight of the ocean and the smell of the salt air. She wasn't at all perturbed by the size of the tiny fort. There were flowers of all shapes and sizes around her, and she leapt upon them to add to her medicine bag with a dogged enthusiasm. When they rode into the courtyard, they were met with a filthily dressed Captain General Tathar. "Fuck off, you," he shouted, drunk, almost falling over. "We don't want any beggars, Dacians, or low-born scum like you here." "And what if we're all three?" Iolem scoffed, dismounting. "Just who the fuck are you?" "I am Captain General Tathar, and this is my command. I should have you flogged for your insolence." "It seems you can't go anywhere without being flogged," Alfil laughed. "I'm a people person," Iolem smiled. "Where is Lord Julius?" He addressed the courtyard at large, ignoring Tathar. "I am in command here," Tathar shouted. "Not that son of a whore." "Come now, my friend," Julius called, appearing from behind a pillar. "I am not the one with a whore for a mother. That's the blacksmith over there." He pointed at a blacksmith who was hammering out a dirk. This seemed to be a common joke as the man in question smiled and waved at them. "Now go back to your wine and leave civilized talk for civilized men." He looked up at Gilorn. "It is good to see you again, Kingslayer." "And you, my lord," Gilorn smiled as he dismounted. "My close friend and comrade, Iolem, and my lady wife, Alfil." Julius nodded at Iolem and bowed to Alfil. "My lady," he said. Alfil was flushed with excitement, and she let out a choking sound when he kissed her hand. "Have you dined?" "Not yet," Gilorn said pointedly. "General Turgon couldn't give us much food, and our stores have run dry." "You must be starving," Julius said, as Alfil dismounted with ease, despite the interference from her dress. "Come, we have much to discuss." The swan was waiting for them, something that Alfil was very loud in noticing. Gilorn wasn't sure how to take that, so he ignored it. Julius sat at the head of the table, and he welcomed them to help themselves to the food. Iolem dived into the fish like Turgon had in the past. It was clear he was taking after his general in many ways. "Who was that man who greeted us?" he said, through a mouthful of fish. "Is he the town drunk?" Julius laughed. "He is my third, Consul Tathar. a powerful man in his time. May we move to the matter at hand, the Swan interjected. Time is against us. Of course, Julius nodded. He pointed to the boot-like image of the land on the board and the island to the south. Sicilia. We're going to take it from Gladium. I have heard of your scouting prowess. I heard that the two of you were able to spy on the Immortal Council, a feat worthy of legend in itself. The two rangers raised their cups in thanks. We want you to infiltrate the island and tell us what forces are there. We need to know what kind of opponent we're fighting. Yes, my lord, Gilorn said. When do we leave? The sooner the better, the Swan commanded. We need this victory before the companies of House Steward arrive. How will we get to the island? Yorlem asked. We have ships. The Swan nodded to the east, many of them captured from Gladium. You'll make the journey under cover of darkness and spend the night and day on the island. During the next night, the same ship will recover you. Very well, Gilorn smiled. I trust you have a room for my lady. Of course, the Swan stood. It is not much, my lady, he said, his face suddenly alive with chivalry. But I trust you will be comfortable. I trust so as well. Alfil blushed, suddenly breathless, surrounded by such gallant men. Julius chuckled. He was fully aware of the sensual legend that surrounded himself and the Swan, and it amused him to see Alfil flutter and attempt to contain herself in their presence. He was tempted to tease her, but he liked Gilorn and would not be so cruel. It had only taken a disguised visit to the brothels in Seaward to see the male whores, who'd been made up to be both himself and the Swan, to see how far this perversion had gone. Some of them were impressively identical, and in some cases, they were more impressive. He had often visited the brothels in an attempt to find knights in compromising situations, so as to gain some leverage over them to gain their service. It had worked, and the knights in question were still loyal to his cause. Take rest, he commanded them. We have clean water and bedding. The ship will be here by nightfall. Yes, my lord, Gilorn nodded. Just out of interest, Yorlem asked, are we getting paid now or after the mission? There was no answer. Alfil was only just able to contain herself by the time they arrived in their room. It was tiny and designed for one, but she didn't care. She dragged her husband down onto the bed and had her way with him, though Gilorn paused to make her promise that she wasn't hot because of the Swan and Julius. After a pause, she promised, but she climaxed too quickly for his liking. She sighed happily and naked next to him. The bed was barely big enough for them to lie on their sides, but she was happy to rub her sweaty body all over him, the wetness in her legs leaking over the sheets, mixed with Gilorn's seed. They lay in breathless silence for a time. Then Alfil smiled and brushed her black hair from her face. I have some news for you, she smiled. Oh, Gilorn said. Tiredness was heavy in his eyes. She whispered in his ear, with a gentle bite on his earlobe in anticipation. I am with child. Gilorn's eyes suddenly opened. What did you say? Alfil was slightly taken aback by his response and recoiled. Are you angry with me? She asked timidly. It disarmed him instantly. She was never timid. Angry, he whispered. How could I be angry? He placed a shaking hand on her stomach. He couldn't say anything more. A terrified smile was etched into his face. I'm a father, he thought. I now have a child. Now you have a reason to come back, Alfil smiled, placing her hand on his. She straddled him with her free leg and lay there until he was called to board the ship. Will you be all right here? Gilorn asked, as he donned his leather jerkin, his manhood hanging limply and shining in the light from her wetness. Surrounded by knights of such renown and beauty, Alfil grinned wickedly. I'll manage." Gilorn laughed and reached for his breeches. She crawled forward and kissed his hands for luck. "I love you," he said to her, his manhood twitching slightly. She looked at him expectantly. "Both of you," he added. "You better," she said. "Your soul is mine now." She rubbed her stomach. "The gods will not let you love another woman." "I don't need the gods for that," Gilorn smiled, "although the prince is still eligible." He trailed off provocatively. She laughed and held his gaze, sitting on the bed with her hair obscuring her breasts. With difficulty, he released his grip on her hand, donned his clothes and left. Nothing more needed to be said. The voyage from the castle to the island was as short as it was dark. The ship's captain had ordered that the crew light no lights and make no sounds. He was a well-spirited man who was constantly chewing on something dark and rock-like. They were sailing a captured pirate ship. Compared to the ships of the Royal Navy, it was a technological miracle, with triangular sails instead of the Roman square, giving it the speed of the lightest ship, but the strength of some of the heaviest. The ram also was terribly simple and lethal, built on a spring bolt, so that when the ram broke the enemy's hull, the ram would spring forward and open into a huge metal cross, and would tear massive chunks out of the hull when it withdrew. The ship sailed smoothly and silently through the water. They were sailing through the power of the oars and the tide. The sails were not in flight. The island came into sight very quickly, a huge mountainous island alive with torchlight. "We will take you around the southern approach," the captain instructed the rangers. "When you return, don't be late." His warning was enhanced by the seaweed-like hair that sat about his head, giving him the look of a drowned man. He would not wait for them, not even for a moment. "My man will take you to the island." He spoke a half-truth. The sailor took them in a rowboat that was used to save people of importance when the ship was in peril. This was an addition that the men of Seaward had added, as the men of importance to the Gladium forces were the captains and admiral, and they were blood-bound to go down with their ships. The man only rowed them to the borders of the shallows of the island. Gilorn was worried. He couldn't swim. Gilorn knew the concept, but he had never tried either. The sailor simply looked at them stubbornly when they told him this. Finally, they surrendered and leapt into the water. Fortunately, the man had chosen well, and the rangers found they could walk along coral until the shallows came up to greet them, and they could then walk to the shore. Gilorn looked around and sniffed. "What is that?" "Smoke and some kind of plant, I think," Gilorn guessed. "Where should we go?" "I say up the mountain." Gilorn looked up. There was no glow of firelight up there, but the mountain was nearly a sheer drop. They moved up the beach, progressing from rock to rock. The beach was deserted, and Gilorn voiced his concern, but Gilorn noted that the southern parts of the mainland were very visible, and a well-placed watchtower would be able to see everything that happened on this beach. They continued along the beach towards the firelight, until they found a place they could begin their climb. Using their dirks for purchase, they began to climb the sheer cliff. The mountain was more a stone hill rather than a massive mount. After a long time, they finally heaved themselves over the cliff edge. They dared not risk standing, so they crawled along the cliff, and when they reached the other side, they found themselves looking over the ruined city of Syracuse and the camp set up there. "By my father," Gilorn swore. Gilorn agreed. "There can be no victory here," Gilorn whispered. "How many are there?" The entire city was bathed in torchlight. For miles in every direction stretched the enemy camp and the ships around them in the harbour. An entire fleet of 40 ships. 10,000, Gilorn suggested. "If we attack this, It will be a massacre. What are they doing here? Yorlem whispered. Why have they mobilized? Ignatius. It's his invasion army, Gilorn realized. We need to warn Julius. We won't be able to do anything until the morrow, Yorlem decided. We need to get closer, find out the strength of their weaponry. Could we sabotage their ships? We could. Yorlem shook his head though. But we cannot risk capture if we're trapped here. We must only observe. Gilorn nodded and agreed in a whisper. Should we climb down and walk amongst them? Yes, Yorlem nodded. We should try to find the commander of this army. See if we can find anything on their tactics or where they will land. All right, Gilorn nodded. Let's find somewhere to dismount where we won't be seen. We'll be too recognizable in these clothes. They crawled along the rock and finally climbed down the mountain. There were 2 pirates who were sitting on barrels arguing over a knife. They didn't notice Gilorn and Yorlem, even when the knives entered their necks. They dragged the men out of sight and donned their black uniforms, leaving their leather armor behind, with the corpses in the bushes and dust. That was stupidly fortunate, Yorlem noted, as he reflected on the perfect fit of his armor. Speak for yourself, Gilorn complained, who had gotten the fatter of the 2 armors, the straps hanging loosely from one arm. Good point. They moved together, and with a low profile. The black leather was ill-fitting on Gilorn, and he had to rip the sleeves from the elbow upwards to hide the huge size difference. For the most part, they went unnoticed, and those who did notice them simply glanced at them to move out of their way or make a dismissive gesture. They found an open tent with maps all around them, and it caught Gilorn's eye. He nodded at it, and they made their way over. Yorlem stood outside while Gilorn searched within. Given that he could read, he could search for intel. He found a map of Gladium. He muttered to himself as he examined the 5-pointed island city. Locations of bases of Gladium, he folding up the scroll. Julius would love to see this. There was nothing else in the tent, but he couldn't leave. Outside there was trouble. An Illyrian reaver, a pirate who favored daggers in combat, was shouting at Yorlem in the sharp horse tongue of Gladium. Yorlem was laughing at him, completely ignorant of what was being said to him. Gilorn crouched by the entrance to the tent, hiding from the view of the men outside. He heard the men grunting impatiently at Yorlem. Finally, they had enough and smashed Yorlem with the back of a boarding axe. One of his teeth clattered into the tent. Yorlem fell onto his back and received a blow to his stomach. He looked up at Gilorn as he was being beaten. Gilorn made to pull out his dirks, but Yorlem shook his head as blood spilled from his mouth. One of the pirates shouted a taunt at him and spat. "You pirates," Yorlem gasped, so hoarsely he could barely be heard. Such soft hands. He was very much mistaken, and another tooth was knocked from him. Gilorn couldn't stay any longer. He stood up against the wall of the tent and whistled. One of the pirates looked up and went inside. Gilorn grabbed the pirate from the side and stabbed him in the throat, and then in heart. There was a rasping sound from the pirate, and he fell to the floor with a loud clunk of metal. The 2 other pirates stood up in anger and drew their swords, double-edged blades with boned hilts. They shouted something in their own tongue. Gilorn guessed what they had said and revealed himself, the 2 dirks in his hands. The pirates shouted and spun their swords in their hands in some kind of combat ritual that was alien to them. Gilorn was afraid, his swordcraft little better than before. The pirates rushed forward. Gilorn thought fast, faster than he thought he could. He threw a dirk to Yorlem. He caught it deftly and stabbed up into the pirate's thigh. The man fell to the floor, and Yorlem stabbed him as he climbed over his body. Gilorn ducked wildly, and the pirate embedded his sword in the wood of the tent. It nearly sliced it in two, and he cut it out. Gilorn ducked and stabbed the dirk into the pirate's foot. He then sliced upwards and right up the man's chest. The pirate fell to his knees, and Iolim finished him off and stabbed him in the back. He let out a satisfied hiss as he spat blood out from his mouth. They looked around. The other pirates were watching them, but were completely unperturbed. "Should we simply walk away?" Gilorn asked. "Let's find out." Yorlim nodded, and they did so. Gilorn looked around as they were safely away. The pirates were already looting the dead bodies of their comrades. "That was close," Gilorn said. "Let's not tempt fate," Yorlim agreed, wiping blood from his eye. "Let's get back up to the mountain top." They made it back to the barrels and changed in the darkness. "Did we get anything of worth?" "I have a map of Gladium," Gilorn said. "All of their bases and castles." He shook his head. "Useless for the more immediate threat." "We can try to find out where they will land." Yorlim grimaced, his face covered in blood. "During the day," Gilorn said, "we'll be too recognized." They began the climb. It was much easier than the other side, but Yorlim was slow to climb. They finally made it to the top, and Yorlim crashed out on the cold rock. "You get some rest and wash. I'll take the first watch. See if we can see anything from up here." "This is probably the worst reconnaissance mission in history." Yorlim chuckled as Gilorn poured the wine they had left up there on his face. He grunted in pain and shivered. "I don't know," Gilorn chuckled, swigging some of the drink. "They have valued steel in those swords, and those pirates weren't wearing armor." Yorlim nodded. "That axe was a heavy thing as well, short but heavy. Did you see how the head of it curved?" Gilorn nodded. "Our archers and skirmishers would do well against them." "If we had any of worth," Gilorn smiled, "aside from us. The cohort throwing spear could do some damage against them," Yorlim laughed. "I bet I kill more than you." "We faced only 1,000 when General Felthor came to the wedding. They nearly killed us all. This is 10,000 against our 1,500. How can we beat that?" "We'll find out," Yorlim sighed. He was trying to stay cheerful, but Gilorn's mood was robbing him of even that. "Why did you save me? I told you not to. I had a plan." Gilorn sighed. "Alphal is with child," he said after a long pause. "Oh, really?" Yorlim looked up from wiping the wine from his face. "Well played. Foolish, but well played." He paused, frowning in confusion. "Why does that matter?" "I wanted to tell you before you die." "And now that you have, you'll let me die next time." "Exactly," Gilorn laughed. "Get some sleep."